The Cessna 172 is the most produced, most common airplane in the world. Cessna's second most produced plane, the 182. We're going to talk all about it in the hangar. Hello and welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Colton Mortgage and
Flying Eyes. I love my Flying Eyes.
I do. We're talking about airplanes today.
We're not only talking about airplanes, we're talking about the Cessna 182. So this episode is all about the 182. And there's probably nobody better that knows the workings of the 182, especially in the power plant, than Cessna John Efinger. John, welcome back to the show. Thank you for coming.
Cessna John, thanks for coming.
Hey, Chris.
Also, we have tower controller extraordinaire Matt Wells, and we have him because, Matt, you own and fly a Cessna 182.
That's what they tell me, yeah.
So he'll occasionally be able to interject some maybe erroneous information about the 182. So, I appreciate you coming.
Sir, yes,
I'm just
sir.
kidding. So, okay, well, let's start with how the 182 came about. I know that it was a variant, or they had the 180, which is a tail dragger.
Right.
So how did the 182 come?
Well, the 182, initially, if you start with the very early models, they had a longer strut on them.
Okay.
And my understanding, and I can't go back, it was before my time in GA, but it had a very tall strut, so it almost looked like it looked and felt and landed like a tail dragger.
Oh, really?
And so it was a little premature for the nose wheel steering. And
Is that why we always have trouble steering Cessna tricycle gears? They're harder to steer than the Pipers.
yeah, I think that's
another
that falls
episode.
on us.
Yeah.
And this was in the 1950s when they came out with the 182, correct?
Yeah, 1956.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
So, so that's...
And then it did have a stabilizer like the early 180 models too.
Oh,
originally.
really?
So you didn't have your elevators, you didn't have your tri-gear like we have today on the more modern ones. And it hadn't changed a lot either in the last 30 years.
Why, let me ask you this, why is the 182, and Matt, you might be able to speak to it, why is the 182 so popular still?
Good question. Biggest thing that spoke to me for that was it's an actual four-person airplane. So 172, yeah, you can stick 4 people in there, but you got to lose some gas first to balance it all out.
And
so,
some weight.
Yeah, that too. So
Me, not you.
yeah, I get it. But the 172, you could stick 3 full-size adults in there, but you couldn't stick 4. I could stick my whole family in the 182, and I could stick 4 full-grown adults in there, still take off just fine. It holds a little bit more weight. It's got a little bit more power, and just the capabilities of it are just a little bit higher than the 172, and that's the main thing that spoke to me for that.
We have a 182 in our flying club, and there's a lot of members that reach out to us about flying the 182 in particular, again, because of the 4-person carrying capacity, but also because it's faster.
Okay.
Yeah, that's also...
All right, so what is the difference, John, in the engine on the 182 versus the 172? So they're both
they're-
4 persons.
Yeah, no, they're one's a 2-place and a small person in back.
All right.
And then the other's a full 4-place. And of course, all 4 doors closed, everybody's there. There's no moving around. And so that would be, the difference between like your 210 and then stepping down. But the performance-wise, you've got a complex. Without the landing gear, you've got a high-performance aircraft, so it's 230 or higher horsepower. And then it's got, the constant speed propeller, 6-cylinder engine, and all the early ones were Continental engines. And pretty much anything you can put in the aircraft, you're going to be able to haul it.
So if it fits, it ships.
Exactly.
182.
I mean, I've had it up to the roof. No, wait, I didn't say that.
Well, with feathers.
Yeah. Very light noodles.
Yeah, yeah.
Pool noodles.
Yeah.
I filled mine
Pool
with pool
noodles.
noodles all the way to the top.
So-
But if you could load it up, pretty much you could haul it. And it is a full 4-place, summertime included. And later on, there's a little more fuel capacity, and then they went to a wet wing from a bladder. And, there's some small changes. But relatively speaking, they stayed the same airplane for about 40 years,
Well, you've been all around the Cessnas, the 172s, 182s, 180s, whatever it is. If it's Cessna, you do it. But for you personally, you chose a 182. Why?
Economics.
Economics.
Yeah. I knew that, affordability was why I originally got the 182. I have my original 172, and I'll keep that forever. It was just a personal choice and a personal plane. And I figure when I can't fly anymore, I'm still going to fly, and I'll get the 172 back. You can't hurt yourself in a 172, So that's kind of a dear memory for me, and so that's why I'm keeping that. But that's a two-place airplane. And as our children got bigger and the boys grew, we couldn't use the 172 anymore. I mean, once their feet can't fit over the front bench, you're over CG. You can't carry weight anymore, So that was originally why I got involved in the 182.
And from an insurance perspective, it doesn't have retractable gear unless you get the retractable gear model, and that's the big thing. I mean,
Okay, well, let's talk about the retractable gear version of the 182. When and how did that come about, and are there problems with it? Is it a good system? What's your opinion?
A great airplane. I've been trying to buy a TR-182 turbo retract for years, and reason being, you don't have 6-passenger insurance rates. So for economy, you can't get a more complex airplane for insurance rates and affordability and operating costs than the turbo retract. The only reason they don't make the turbo retract was they came out with a 6-passenger 210, and it crushed, their future 210 sales. Because it's
because people wanted the 182, or
well, if you've got a TR-182, you've got the very
smaller 210 essentially.
Yeah, it's like a small 210 in a sense that it's got retractable gear. It has the speed and performance almost of that of the 210.
I see, but with less insurance and
much more economical to operate.
So economics. I see.
So they stopped making that in order to further the sales of the 210?
I can't tell you that that's why it came about, but I got a good suspicion marketing had a lot to do with that.
Understood. So how hard is a good 182 to find?
Well, I don't know when John got his. I obtained mine last year, and
it was hard.
it was hard. Yeah, it was
and expensive.
It was not easy. They were flying off the shelf, literally, pun intended. And you'd call for one, they'd be like, "Yeah, it's gone already, under contract." You call for another, cash? No, okay, it's gone. So it was. I think when the events started to fall into place, I think I went through about 10.
Oh my.
And for the reasons of the 182 that I got going into the club, it needed to have certain items checked, so it needed to be capable essentially. And half of those were just like, oh, it's been out of annual for 10 years. Oh, it's this, but they still wanted like $105,000 or $200,000 for a broken airplane out of annual. And I'm like, no, it needs to have, relatively fresh this. It has to have decent logbooks. I learned my lesson with the Cardinal, so I went through and did all my research. But the problem is I just kept on flying off the shelf. So by the time you could get to one, you'd essentially have to make the offer and then start going through everything, and then potentially pull the offer later on. And yeah, I think mine was lucky number 10, and I got, called him on the day that the previous person tried to buy the sale fell through, and I called him and said, maybe interested, want to get some info, and he sent me all the stuff, and I started looking over it, and then I had a buddy look over it, and he's like, wow, it's actually not that bad. But
so you'd pull the trigger on that one, like
I pulled the trigger almost instantaneously on that one.
Okay.
And then I had the option. I said it right up front. I had the option to back out. And you can always blame stuff on the bank if you need to. But we went through the whole process. I had 2 or 3 people look at it and help me, and got some books about it, and it was checking all the boxes pretty well. And to this day, it's a pretty good airplane, pretty capable.
And it's
and-
a stepping stone,
Minimal problems.
because a lot of trainers, just about every flight school's 150s and then the 172s. Then they go to the 182 and they introduce, the constant speed propeller and higher performance, and then eventually 6-seaters and retractable gear, and then so on. Which Christie's, been working on here for a while. So, and it's a way to get into the airlines, and you start out, with the smaller miles and keep on moving up.
What are your thoughts on actually doing primary training as a student pilot in a 182?
I know a guy that started with a 210,
Not as a student training.
but it really, it's a lot to take in, but everything is a lot to take in when you're training. And it's kind of hard for me to look back because I started in a 172. I have never till this day flown a 150.
Really?
I've just never, I look at them and I thought, I can't fit in that. And I don't want to be in that. Well, I'll take it back. I did fly in one time in Colorado mountains, and I decided I didn't want to fly after that. And it took me about 10 years later on until I thought about getting in an airplane, and I realized they weren't all that small and delicate.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I changed. I think I may have gotten in a 172 or 182 years later, and then I thought, well, this is doable. But my original flight was
I did my entire.
on Colorado in a 150 or a 152. I don't even know the difference between those. I know I should
10
say
horsepower.
that.
I know that because I actually got my student pilots. All my training was in a 152. They also had a 150 I flew occasionally, but the difference between 150 and 152, as I understand it, is an engine that has 10 more horse. But that 10 really makes a
They're
difference.
still small. That's all
They
I
are
know.
small.
They're
Well, you're
small
sitting on
and
the
I stay
floor.
away from 'em. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
so-
a little bench seat.
So, I mean, in a 182, there's just a lot more going on
So
for as far as a primary student is concerned.
So the closest analogy I can think of is, do you ride a motorcycle? No?
No.
Of course not. Okay,
I fly airplanes.
Okay, so when I started to learn, I was told you should not go jump on a 1,000 cc bike. Basically, don't go get a lot of power because people do that and then they go kill themselves. But so I think translating to that, because I know I have friends who have done it, it's the mindset. So a 182 as a primary trainer, it's doable. It's definitely doable. It's only 500 pounds more than a 172, so I think it can be done. I know people who have started in a 172 and transitioned to a 210, and to this day have not crashed it. So it's the mindset. It's the mindset, and
Wait, hold on a second. Does
Damage.
running over a pothole count?
oh, I wasn't referring to him.
Oh, okay.
Completely somebody different. No, that's definitely a separate story. But it's just the mindset. If you got the mindset where you can put the gear up and do the propeller as you need to and manage things a lot faster, then yeah, you can start in the 182 definitely. Or
I've seen it done. I just think it takes longer.
I
Well,
think
and
it
if that's
could.
your end game, if your end game is to move into a
Yeah.
complex airplane, if you're just wanting to recreational learn to fly, then start out small, and that's when I got involved in it. It was only recreational, so I had no aspiration of being an airline pilot or moving into a twin rating or anything like that. I just wanted to fly. And so I guess your end game has got a lot to do with, what selection you need there. But the 182, as far as a trainer, I think it's fine as long as, it's going to take a little more time.
And it's going to cost a little bit more money.
It's going to cost a little more money.
a little bit more.
And that's all part of that too. You say why everybody started out with the Cessnas, in the 152s and the 172s. It's a very cheap entry level aircraft, and it's very economical to fly. So it's a real good fit for flight schools.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of economical, let's talk, and I know this is, let's just talk ballparks because I know we'll get in trouble here, but the cost to operate. I know that my 210, when I ran the numbers, putting everything in there from fuel to hangar to insurance, everything else, that I was about $200 or more an hour that was going to cost me to operate that plane based on the amount of I'm flying it a year. Okay, and I know all those variables go into change it. So as a ballpark, a 210, $200 an hour, roughly. That's amortizing an engine after, 16, 1,800 hours. What does a
I'm gonna mention that.
182 cost per hour, roughly?
Mine may be a little bit different than John's because mine was intended to go into the Aero Club that we're in, and the Aero Club obviously covers the hangar and the insurance for
Okay.
it. But then the members pay a dry rate, and the mine goes for $90 an hour, and that helps offset things. It does not pay for everything.
What does it cost you if you were just flying your 182? What does it cost you?
I mapped out numbers. If it were to be just me by myself alone, and I had a hangar around here, which they're hard to come by enough, it'd be about $150-ish, $160 an hour with the gas.
What do you think?
That's just me.
Oh, I've never contemplated financial figures with aviation. I mean, it's stupid money. If there's any performance improvement, I put it on my airplane. And I basically have your engine in my airplane.
Oh,
So, fuel economy was never a consideration when I did all that. And it's hurting me now. And, so I might as well have a six-seater at this point. But I don't have your insurance rates. That's the good thing about it.
That's true.
And but I've pretty much got the same performance as the retractable TR-182, but I don't have the turbo and I don't have retractable gear. But speed-wise, performance-wise, they're about identical. There's not a whole lot of difference. And I burn about 4 gallon an hour more fuel than TR-182.
Oh, wow. Well, because you got that bigger engine.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk what I call tort reform. When general aviation died from all the lawsuits in the 80s, you had all the 182s made there. And then when it was reborn in the 90s, well, take me through maybe some of the difference between the 182s before and the 182s after.
Okay, so prior to the restart version, it was all Continental products.
Okay.
And they all had the 470, and later on, the last year, with the P model that he's got, it's going to be the R engine, and the R's and the S's, and then they went to a high compression U model, and it gave it a little more power, and then they started the restarts from that model. But plane for plane, there's not a lot of difference between any of the late model 70 vintage 182s. They're all the same. And the restarts, you've got a Lycoming power plant. They put a good fuel system in them, and they're much more balanced engine, and the actual airframe is identical.
Oh, okay.
There's no difference in the airframe between the P's and the Q's and then the new restarts. I actually have pictures. I was not allowed in the experimental hangar at Cessna, but they said we were allowed on the flight line, and they didn't realize they pushed the original 182P around the back of the hangar that had all the restart conversion done to it with the Lycoming engine, with the new seat tracks and the new seating, and it's essentially the same airplane. Much better production line once they got the production line running. It's got corrosion proofing throughout, which is a real nice change. They're heavier, with that said. Much better interior, some more robust airframe components, but essentially the same airplane, and then a Lycoming engine it's sporting now, and a 3-bladed prop.
Okay, so if you see a 2-bladed 182, it was pre-restart.
70s.
Yeah, okay. What's the difference between the Lycoming and the Continental?
Well, it's starting to become the Lycoming are a whole lot more reliable.
Really?
It used to be the other way around, and they had a lot of
interesting.
corrosion issues with the Lycomings in the 70s and later on for into the 80s, and then now it seems that the Continentals are the ones with the corrosion issues, and the Lycomings seem to be more robust and don't have as many problems.
All right, last question I have, the cost difference. When you go to buy an airplane, I know that the rates have gone way up lately, but it doesn't matter because the difference between a 172 and a 182, what's a average 182 going for today, and what's average 182 going for today?
You know, 172 and a 182?
Yeah.
Okay.
What
You said 182 and 182.
Yeah, 172.
I got you.
It just depends on what it's got inside of it. I mean, I looked at, last year when I got mine, And then nowadays I see them on, Facebook and stuff, and they're like, $200,000 for the same exact thing or something with less equipment. And it seems like whatever's avionics is going to be, or autopilot, that's going to be the biggest, this is why it costs so much extra. And then maybe time on engine, but people are like, oh yeah, it needs an overhaul, but it's still worth all this money. So it's
So you're seeing $200,000 on 182?
I saw one the other day that was 200, and I sent it to a couple friends. I said, does this seem right? I mean,
Well, but is that an outlier? I mean, like when you were looking last year, were they like in the 150?
120s, 130s, and
120s,
now
130s.
the trend is going up toward 180s.
Even in
190s.
last year.
I think
Yeah.
a lot of it is just supply and demand.
And,
they're
yeah,
getting
they're
harder to find.
Flying off the shelf.
Yeah,
for
they're
the
getting
same
harder to
exact
find.
thing.
It's kind of like the housing market right now.
Yeah.
You got to come in with a cash offer 10, 20% above asking value
Or they won't
if you
even think
want to
about you.
seriously consider
And you're
it.
talking about pre-restarts.
Right.
All of them,
right.
yeah.
So,
Well, I mean,
so if you got a 182 that was going for 130 a year ago, what was a somewhat similar 172 pre-restart going for?
Maybe 90 or 100, depending on what had in it.
Okay, so 100 to 130. So
You go get
know,
a G1000 in there, it's going to be the same
30,
or more.
40% more for 182. Is what I'm trying to get to.
And then you're talking financial figures, and I told you, stupid money. I could actually get my money back if I sold my airplane
Yeah.
today.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
And it was never a consideration before. It was just about
No.
performance and upgrades. And in today's market, what I'm seeing out there now, it's
crazy.
incredible
Stupid
It
right
is
now.
crazy.
And some of the
really
people are
is.
taking advantage of that, and they're like, oh, there's a market there, and I'm smart, so I'm going to buy this and flip it for 20 grand more.
And they're doing that
Yeah.
right now. I saw that actually this week, and it just kind of amazed me.
It floors me, honestly. I know people that never considered selling their airplanes previously that are selling them.
So when are you going to sell the One Warrior?
Never.
Well, I've noticed. I noticed with Lola, my 210. Yeah, what I bought for and what I'm seeing comparable planes going for now. I was just hoping it would retain its value. It's significantly more than that now. 4 years later.
And 15 years ago, it was just the other way. I mean, 15 years ago, I couldn't afford a 210, and so the 182 was the most affordable aircraft I could get into. Well, now I could own a 210 for what the 182s are going for
Yeah.
today. And that's really not a very long time period when you think about it. It's just that right now it is a supply and demand. And the fact it's $500,000 for a new Cessna today.
Yeah.
So that's driving the cost up as well. And like any kind of market, I've watched this happen with the motorcycles, with the vintage cars, and now it's airplanes. So how much longer it's going to continue, who knows?
And then they'll come back down. All right, final thoughts on the 182, Matt.
It's a great airplane.
Cool.
That's pretty deep.
All right. Well, I mean, I went into mine expecting to have a lot more problems than was foreseen, and I did a pre-buy/annual before I got it, and it still comes out with a few squawks. There's little nitpicky items that you need to fix, but minus those squawks, it's a great airplane. Even if it wasn't owned by me or whatever, or whoever was owned by the 182, I'd fly anybody's 182.
Which reminds me, before I get your final thoughts, John, what are the big gotchas if somebody's looking to buy a 182?
The biggest thing you need on a 182 to look for is obviously damage history.
Okay.
But really today, with the age of these aircraft, with the aging aircraft issue about, mostly corrosion. The number one item is corrosion.
Okay.
And there's only a few corrosion-prone areas that you need to look at on those airplanes. They're not really complex at all or very difficult to work on. So corrosion, and then you worry about your power plant and then avionics. Another issue I have personally is the wiring. If you've got 50, 60-year-old wiring in your airplane, it needs to be refurbished. And a lot of people are still flying around with the old wiring in their airplanes, and that's a little questionable. Everything today just about has got a new avionics update of some kind. And that's another thing that we could talk about another time as far as how that all works. If you've cut out 3 different systems out of that airplane and upgrades over the last 40 years, and all the original wirings in
It's
there,
still sitting there.
it's time to go in there and refurbish those kind of things. I love the early models with the manual flaps. And I was very torn when I bought my airplane. I had a little bigger cabin and electric flaps, which I didn't really care for. And then you got a little smaller cabin, which I didn't like at all, but I had manual flaps. And if I could put manual flaps in a brand new 182, I think that'd be the best airplane built. and I just kind of like to, pilot things. You got to have something to do.
Right.
And if it's all automated, there's no fun in it. Anybody could do it. So, but the manual flaps in the early models were, I wish they'd have kept that a lot longer. And now everything seems to be going towards automated.
Piper did.
Yeah.
Piper kept it, just saying.
Okay.
Yeah, but the wing's in the wrong place.
It is. And on that,
I like to look down.
On that-
I could see ahead and I could see up a little bit, but
and you get shade and
For
everything.
certain pilots, it's not in the wrong place.
All right. So, John, thank you so much for coming on again.
Sure.
And Matt.
Yeah. Oh, hey, look at that. Oh, hey. There we go.
Okay. All right, and thank you guys for watching, and go fly 182, have some fun, and if you like our channel, hit that like button and subscribe and share it to other people. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next time.
In the hangar.